Sir, $1 billion into this Bitcoin strategy EF
Mhm.
launch in the past 2 days of the fastest growing ETF of all time, and it isn't even tied to the physical Bitcoin. It's not even. It's tied to a derivative. Just give us a feel of why so much excitement about this. Is this something that's a knee jerk reaction, or is this something that signals the start of something very important?
So that's a fantastic question, and it's great that you pointed out that the ETF is not actually what you might call a spot ETF or a physical ETF. It's actually a Bitcoin futures ETF. And let me just explain the distinction a little bit. In normal ETFs or physical ETFs, if you break down the fund, you will see underlying securities or underlying assets. But in this case, if you break down this Bitcoin futures ETF, all you will see is cash and contracts. Now, why would the SEC of the US approve something that doesn't seem to be as straightforward? Frankly, it's actually a little bit more straightforward to regulate the futures ETF because it will fall nicely within the existing consumer protections. The SEC in the US is sidestepping one of the key issues in a normal ETF, which is custody. And so with this ETF, they're easily able to avoid those issues. And as we see, or as we can see, the interest in the crypto markets is so high, such that yeah, as you pointed out, in day one of trading, it did at least $1 billion.
Michelle, you mentioned that this is a sort of derivative ETF, right? But analysts are saying this might be a precursor to a spot
Mhm.
Bitcoin ETF market. What would be the difference here, and how exciting would that be for the movement of the cryptocurrency?
Sure. You see, the excitement around the Bitcoin futures ETF, it's don't get me wrong, it's warranted, right? Because crypto markets have always been sentiment driven, and anytime that there is greater acceptance of crypto or news about greater acceptance of crypto, the markets inevitably move, right? But it doesn't mean that as you buy more and more of the shares of this Bitcoin futures ETF, that the underlying fund will have to buy and more Bitcoin. It doesn't work that way. So while the correlation is there, it's not necessarily 1:1. Now you're also right in pointing out that probably having approved a Bitcoin futures ETF, the US SEC is now more likely to approve a spot ETF at some point. Because over the past couple of years, there have been about 10 applications. And I think right now there's a bit close to that number as well in applications for a Bitcoin spot ETF. More exciting probably than the recent ETF is
Wow.
potentially Grayscale's GBTC being converted into an ETF as opposed to being a traded trust at this point.
All right, let's talk about retail investors then, especially the Filipinos. What should they be looking at? You mentioned that the ETF funds are mainly for institutional investors. Should they be looking at these as well, or should they be sticking to looking at the currency, cryptocurrency still? And also, what's your expectation here in terms of performance? It's been up 130% already year to date. How much farther can this go?
Well, the way that this ETF is designed is that it's supposed to track the performance of Bitcoin. Now, because it's not based on actual underlying BTC, you will see what we might call tracking error, right? So um, now, with regards to whether retail investors should take part in this ETF, or specifically Filipino investors, at this point, if you want to get exposure to Bitcoin, you still may as well just be better off buying the actual Bitcoin. We have sufficient protections, at least here in the Philippines, that we have regulated marketplaces and exchanges where you can buy and sell and actually hold crypto. So at least if you just want to take part in this ride that Bitcoin is on, you may be better off buying the token.
And what about the strategy here, especially with the performance? Is this in any way a defensive asset, especially in pandemic, diba? Vis-a-vis
Mhm.
the equities, should you be investing in this when the equity markets are down? How much money should you have before you start thinking of putting your assets in cryptocurrencies? Do you need to be a seasoned trader before dipping your feet into these waters?
Well, what's interesting about investing in general is that it's never been advisable for anyone to hold just one asset, right? So, as we always say, we invest with a portfolio mindset. And at this point, I think it's safe to say that Bitcoin, as volatile as it is, or perhaps because it is volatile, it belongs in a portfolio. Now, with regards to whether or not should this replace equities in my portfolio, that's really a judgment call based on a person or investor's risk appetite. But historically, if you try to analyze Bitcoin's or even the crypto market's performance over time, it tended to not be very well correlated with the equities market, or at least the fundamentals themselves are not correlated. So just based on that alone, it could serve as a good hedge. And in fact,
Okay.
people are arguing that it looks more a lot like gold in that respect.
Okay, so it could be a hedge. As you mentioned, it's still very good to diversify, regardless of your portfolio. It
Mhm.
depends on your risk appetite and marginal risk there in your portfolio. Finally, talk about the PDAX and this recently raised $12 million funding. You have a new investor. What are you going to be using this proceeds for, especially in expanding, the accessibility of these types of assets to the normal retail investor?
All right. Yeah. So we recently brought in new investors. PDAX has been in the market for almost 3 years, right? And so we've seen how the market has grown from something very niche to something now trending towards being a lot more mainstream. Today we're seeing a lot more high net worth individuals, families, even financial institutions try and participate in crypto. Here in the Philippines, we also have play to earn use cases for crypto that have been very interesting. So this new funding actually signals not just interest from the outside world in the Philippines crypto market, but also it signals strongly where this could go for Filipinos, right? And that is in mainstream use, and which PDAX will invest in to improve the crypto market infrastructure here and better serve Filipinos.